Welcome to Pen to Pod. This week we are doing a solo episode with me where I will be diving into an aspect of writing craft. For the month of October, we will be talking about writer's voice. And this episode will have me sharing insights from others, reading excerpts from short stories, and having my own thoughts about writer's voice. If you haven't already, go ahead and give us a follow wherever you are listening to this podcast, or go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel at Mick Writes. Let's dive in. Finding your writing voice is a phrase I see being searched for a lot on platforms like YouTube. But after going through my own existential crisis over voice, I've realized that no one really has the answer. Now, this is true for most things with writing, but with voice, it feels like something that can't be taught. It's something that really has to be discovered by the writer. I've been really stuck on voice lately. I recently attended a literary conference put on by Literary Cleveland called Incubator. It's an annual free literary conference that featured some amazing speakers such as Edwidge Danticat, Hanif Abdurraqib, and so many more. If you want to hear me talk about some main takeaways from that conference, I have a YouTube video that goes through all these takeaways and I shout out all the amazing writers that I heard from. One session was titled Raise Your Voice: How an Effective Voice Can Refine Your Story by Nardine Taleb. Nardine Taleb is an Egyptian-American writer and speech therapist. Her poetry chapbook Warda was published by Passengers Press in 2023. She started off the lesson with an exercise seeing if we could guess who the author was based on short excerpts. I was surprised at how quickly each voice came to me and the rest of the audience. Hearing how different Toni Morrison and Virginia Woolf sound, how distinct their voices really are. Every writer has a distinct writing voice. But as I break into my first draft on my current project, I've been finding a hard time understanding my own author voice for this book. When researching voice, I read a quote by Donald Graves, a pioneer in literacy education. He said, "Voice is the imprint of ourselves on our writing." Writer's voice is the combination of a multitude of things. It's the vocabulary used, the syntax, sentence structure, and the own writer's personal experiences. Nardine Taleb in her talk Raise Your Voice broke down voice into different categories: you the writer and you the character. You the writer is how I was able to recognize Woolf versus Morrison. It's your personal flair, that imprint of ourselves on our writing. It is found in the mechanics of tone, language, and theme. Whereas you the character is the point where you disengage from the story and let your characters take over, only using you as a mode of transportation. Our voice, it seems, can change over time, and can even change within a piece of work, depending on what point of view we are working in. But today, instead of talking about voice in this abstract sense, or telling you some foolproof plan I've found out about how to find your voice, spoiler alert, I don't have that. We're going to read through some examples showcasing how voice impacts the stories we tell. Voice for me seems to be how the author and character views and interprets the world. And I'm starting to realize that, like with most things in writing, a lot of voice is going to come in the rewriting, specifically line editing. And while I'm a firm believer in just having fun in your first draft, which is what I'm trying to do now, I've also been trying to understand my own writing voice, and how I've been doing that is, of course, by reading a lot. I'm actually not a very fast reader. I'm not going to be someone who can read 100 books a year. I don't have the time. So when I want to study a certain aspect of writing craft, I usually turn to short stories. This may be the creative writing major in me, where we studied a lot of short stories for so many years, but I feel like overall, short stories are an underrated form of writing that doesn't get the spotlight in the same way longer works do. I'm under the belief that shorter fiction is so much harder to write, at least for me, than a longer fiction, because you have to convey everything you want to in such a condensed space. Whereas in my book, I have chapters and chapters to take you through these characters' lives and to really showcase the world. Short stories can be a great tool to understanding your writing better by analyzing others' works, and it goes by a lot quicker than analyzing a full novel. Let's look at an excerpt from Mirror Ball by Jack Skelly, which was published in Hobart Literary Magazine. I'm going to read you the first paragraph. The darkness of the nightclub is an airborne aphrodisiac, a medium fixating through more or less real encounters among empaths of mind, emotion, and body. At their center is the glitter globe, rotating the room with Saturnian rings. The backlit liquor casements retinge and refract colors room-wide to omni-whirl and infinitize loops of desire. These harmonize into harmonized minds, the projections of objects. From personal to interpersonal, in this space the effect is, at heart, not merely encased and enshrined through codes of language, but an actual tantric skin and breath experience. Okay, so I want to break that down a bit. When I was looking for short stories to talk about voice, this one instantly grabbed me. I mean, just the first part of the first sentence. The darkness of the nightclub is an airborne aphrodisiac. I don't know, the voice in this piece it's very cerebral and it's very ethereal at the same time. And I think that very much comes across. Being able to describe the nightclub and the setting as an airborne aphrodisiac just has a lot of weight to it, you know? The darkness of it being this aphrodisiac lends way to the club goers, feeling like they can do anything. And with this cover of darkness, they are really free, like to do whatever they want, free their inhibitions completely. And it's like this airborne toxic event that's happening. It's a drug that is seeping into everyone there. Just that first line is so heavy with setting and tone and world building for this short story. I also loved the sentence, at their center is the glitter globe, rotating the room with Saturnian rings. So instead of calling the disco ball a disco ball, or like the title, a mirror ball, Skelly uses glitter globe, which I thought was such an interesting phrase. I instantly highlighted it. And this is where voice in line editing comes to play, right? Who knows? Maybe Skelly always had glitter globe written down, but maybe he didn't want to say disco ball, because if you think about it, disco ball has a very different feeling to it than glitter globe. A disco ball to me, one, conjures up images of a disco, conjures up images almost of like a high school prom, and a glitter globe does have that ethereal tone to it that Skelly pronounces by saying, rotating the room with Saturnian rings. Just out of those two sentences, we are getting this very cerebral, ethereal tone and very kind of light and high on your feet and not grounded in reality, if that makes sense. We're describing darkness as an airborne drug and a disco ball as a glitter globe with Saturnian rings. These aren't phrases to describe something that grounds us to the page, right? When reading this, it feels very poetic as I read it out loud, and I feel very up in space, which, if you are going to a nightclub, you might be taking something that could put you under the influence to feel like you're up in space. And I think this first paragraph does a good job of putting the reader in the mindset of the club goer. So we have that sentence of the darkness of the nightclub, airborne aphrodisiac, a glitter globe, but then he goes on to describe more senses that are happening. He says the backlit liquor casements retinge and refract colors room-wide to omni-whirl and infinitize loops of desire. It's just such an interesting sentence. I also instantly highlighted this because I don't think I could ever write a sentence like that. It's just not how I would describe the scene. And this is also where writer's voice comes to play. Everyone's going to write things differently. This sentence I could break down quite a bit. So let me read it again. The backlit liquor casements retinge and refract colors room-wide to omni-whirl and infinitize loops of desire. Now, I know what refract means, but I did not know what retinge means, and so I looked up retinge. What's funny is I could not find a dictionary definition. So retinge is not actually a word. And I found this Reddit post of someone asking the same question I had, which was, what is this word? It's from Charlotte Bronte's poem, Pilot's Wife's Dream. She uses the word retinge. People in this Reddit thread said they think it's re-tinge. So retinge as into recolor. This is a really good example of how voice also comes down to the words that we use. Skelly could have done re-tinge, but kept retinge as a cohesive word. In my opinion, I feel like to reflect the word refract that he uses next. Because he says the backlit liquor casements retinge and refract colors. So keeping it cohesive, it feels like a push and a pull, right? Even when I say it out loud. The backlit liquor casements retinge and refract colors room wide to omni-whirl, right? It gives that a push and a pull. And you can see the colors like going in and out across the room. I thought that was a very cool use of a word that kind of exists but doesn't. And that goes along with the tone of this whole piece. Something that doesn't feel grounded, doesn't feel super real. It feels ethereal and cerebral. That is all encased in that one word. Even just in that first paragraph, we took two sentences and broke them down a bit more into the word choices, the sentence structure, and the style that the author is writing in. But I want to remind us that voice is a sum of many parts. So it's not just only the sentence structure. It's not only our word choice that comes from writing or line editing, and it isn't even only our style. It also is our own personality. It combines all of these things to form our voice. Just like I said before, describing a nightclub, would not describe it the same way that Skelly did in the beginning of this piece, even if we were writing about the exact same thing. And this brings me to the first writing exercise that I implore all of you to do. If you have time today or this week or sometime this month to set aside, I invite you to echo and then imitate a writer that you enjoy. Try to find a short story that you connect with, or pick up your favorite book and choose a paragraph to echo and then imitate. And what I mean by that is something that we did back in college for me, taking creative writing classes, is I would physically, like pen to paper, write out a sentence or a paragraph that I liked from a specific writer. And after writing it out, I would also read it out loud. Then that's the echoing stage, right? I'm writing it out, I'm saying it out loud. Then I'm going to imitate it. I talked about this in a video that I did about how to annotate books to study writing craft. And one thing I like to do is sometimes rewrite a whole chapter, just a paragraph or an idea in a book. And this is what you're going to do next. So rewrite that paragraph, sentence, what have you, in your own voice. This is such a great exercise to see how you think about the words. Think about how to really understand how you think about the premise that was given. The best way to find your author voice is to write and read a lot. So these exercises can help to kind of draw that out of you and to really solidify what type of voice you want to have. I'm going to read another excerpt from a short story entitled Coyotes by Zoe Rose. This one is so much different from the first one we just read. And I want you to think about what is different and why you feel like it's different. Just a quick content warning for body and gore illusions. It does talk about a dead deer. So, sorry about that. I remember hearing the coyotes howl for days before we thought to look for the deer. That's not exactly true. I want to tell you the truth. It had started with my mother. She'd held me after I'd woken from the sound of yipping and banshee screams. Well, really, it started with my brother. I'd had a nightmare that he'd brought the coyotes into our house. They wouldn't leave and I couldn't wake up. I don't think that's quite right. Forgive me. I'm trying to find a beginning. Let's start with the bones. That's easiest. The dog had found a scapula while playing fetch. More scraps of deer followed, bits of pelt, small bones, metacarpals, phalanges, splintered ribs. They were slim and dark. I'm reading about deer anatomy right now, trying to remember. It's not important, but I want you to see them like I did. It wasn't until the dog appeared with a hoof at the door that my father went on the offensive. By then the deer was open where it lay by the brook. I could see its echoes. Here's where a hoof was planted. Here's where the pack descended. Here's where its innards dragged as it staggered to the water. Hungry snouts and claws had torn the pelt and shoved it aside. Maybe while it struggled. Hopefully while it was still. In the days that followed, flies, foxes, crows, hawks, and possums had begun to arrive. It was unfortunate that the deer had only 2 eyes to offer. They go quickly with this crowd. Soft and wet and so easy to claw and peck and slurp from their sockets. No matter, though, these guests are talented at unmaking, neatly snapping ligaments and cracking femurs to release the rich marrow. Squirming maggots burrowed into what little flesh remained. The deer would provide a lushness to the forest floor as it leached into the soil, fresh green growing in its shape, a whale fall of sorts. Sorry for a little bit of the squirminess. I literally could just sit here and read that whole story. It's gorgeous. Please go read both of these short stories. I will have them linked in the episode description. But already, can you hear how different Rose sounds compared to Skelly in the previous Mirror Ball, right? That short story opened with a very, like I said, cerebral, not grounded, ethereal feeling. This feels more, earthy in a sense, matter of fact, and stoic in a way. So already the voice and tone is so different, which is why I wanted to read from both of these. I want to talk about a couple of lines in this piece that I highlighted. Well, I guess let's just start with the beginning, which is also what this author is trying to do, right? Whoever is the voice of the character in this piece is trying to describe to you this memory of seeing this dead deer being ripped apart by coyotes. And I love that in the beginning, our character is struggling to figure out where to start. She first said she remembers hearing the coyotes howl for days. Then she said, no, that's not exactly true. It started with her mother. No, it actually started with my brother. I don't think that's quite right, trying to find a beginning. And then she says, let's start with the bones. That's easiest. What I love about that phrase in general is, yes, she's then going into the bones of the deer and talking about the skeleton of the deer, but starting with the bones of something is already a phrase to like get back, to the bare bones of a concept, peel everything away and just get right down to it. It is such a good play on words. The character is trying to just peel everything back and give it to us straight. I want to talk to you about this deer that I saw. And she says that in multiple ways with that phrase of, let's start with the bones. That's easiest. Chef's kiss, I really thought that was brilliant. I also want to talk a little bit about you, the character, like I mentioned before in voice, because our first short story was more omniscient. Third person narrator pulled back, speaking about the environment. This one is first person with our main character. And while the writer's voice is definitely different, the character's voice is really coming through in this piece. Whether she's trying to figure out how to tell us the beginning, or where she says, after talking about the bones, which I guess I'm just saying that she's a she. Don't mean to gender this character. Where the character says, I'm reading about deer anatomy right now, trying to remember. It's not important, but I want you to see them like I did. This is pulling us into the mind of the character. They're saying, I want you to understand everything I saw about this deer. Like this, seeing this deer changed the character. It changed them intimately. And you can tell with like the frantic pacing in the beginning of them trying to find a beginning of the story. And then here in this detail of, it's not important that you know about deer anatomy, but I want you to see the bones like I did. That shows us how pivotal this moment was for the character. And if you read the whole story, you'll see why. But it's such a great way to use your character's voice alongside your writer's voice. And then I love this next sentence. I guess stoic wasn't the right word. It feels very reverent to this dead deer. And I want to show an example of that I highlighted. Rose says, I could see its echoes. Here's where a hoof was planted. Here's where the pack descended. Here's where its innards dragged as it staggered to the water. That is so visual, and describing the scene as the deer's echoes is so beautiful, and it feels spiritual and reverent, where our character is really being empathetic towards the deer, right? Putting themselves in the deer's shoes of, this is where they stepped, this is where the coyotes cornered in, and this is where they tried to fight to get away. Our character is envisioning the scene that went down. And after reading this piece, a quote on Voice by Meg Rosoff really resonated with me, where Meg says, "Your writing voice is the deepest possible reflection of who you are. The job of your voice is not to seduce or flatter or make well-shaped sentences. In your voice, your readers should be able to hear the contents of your mind, your heart, and your soul." I want to remind us that because, I'm sitting here and I'm reading you these beautiful sentences, right? And they're well-shaped sentences with these intimate details and interesting word choices, and that plays a part in it. But that is not the point of writing voice. It's not to be the best shaped sentence with the most flowery prose in the room. It is to choose the correct words and tone that amplify the contents of your story, which, like Meg says, is the contents of yourself, your mind, your heart, your soul. And if you're writing in first person, the contents of your characters' mind, heart, and soul. So after echoing and imitating and rewriting paragraphs that really connect with you, I want you to partake in a writing exercise that was created by Josh Sippy for Gotham Writers. And he calls this a surefire technique for finding your voice. So they had a Creative Writing 101 class that he teaches at Gotham Writers. And in this class, he has all of the students write about something you hate. That's it. So just picking something you absolutely hate and write about why. I thought this was a beautiful way to find your voice because Sippy talks about hate being a very strong emotion, and he says arguably the strongest, which I agree with. Hate is so primal, it's very visceral, and it's not being annoyed by something, or it's not what is your biggest pet peeve. It's truly what do you hate? And the purpose of this exercise is to hold no punches and really go in. The purpose of this exercise is to draw on such a strong emotion where we can't hide behind the subject matter, right? Our personality is forced to shine through when we are talking about something that can be so passionate as much as hate can. So those are two of the writing exercises I suggest that you guys doing this week or anytime that you have some free moments. Go find a short story, go pick up one of your favorite books, and find a paragraph or a scene. Try to find writing that you want to emulate and do that echo and imitate practice. So write it out physically by hand, type it out, and then say it out loud, whatever works for you. Then go ahead and try to rewrite it in your own voice. Afterwards, write about something you hate. Feel that emotion. Let your personality flow onto the page. Before we end today's episode, I want to read another quote about voice by Jack Hart. "The ultimate secret to letting your voice sound on the page is simply to relax and be yourself. Writing is stressful. Sit down at a keyboard, and unconscious waves of tension ripple through your body. You clench your teeth, you tighten your shoulders, you tap your foot, and the words flowing through your fingers grow rigid and formal, stiffened with the frozen formality of an awkward job interview. When I'm running a writing workshop, I usually stop the participants halfway through their first drafting exercise. Time for a tension check, I say, explaining that if their necks, backs, and shoulders are tight, their writing will suffer. They loosen up, go back to work, and the clatter of laptop keys ramps up a notch or two. That change in pace is important. A relaxed writer is a fast writer, and fast writers sound more like themselves. It only makes sense. Writers who agonize over a rough draft, futzing with every word, will submerge their true selves in nondescript formality. When we speak with the natural rhythms of an at ease conversation with friends, we reveal who we really are. Writing's not spoken conversation, of course, but the same principle applies. I thought that was really beautiful and a good reminder because, yes, when I'm breaking down voice and studying it, I'm looking at those mechanical elements we talked about, the sentence structure, the word choice, the styling, but it is all of that plus you. I guess that's the main takeaway here, is to make sure you come out on the page. That is ultimately the secret ingredient for your writing voice. And the only way to find your writing voice is to write more, read more, and really think about how you want to come across on the page, how you want to show up to your readers. The month of October is going to be a fun one and packed with some really great episodes for spooky season. So next week, October 7th, we have an interview with T.N. Vitus, the author of Sacrilege and Heirs of Destruction. And then on October 21st, we have an interview with author Rachel Kitch, who is a horror writer, which I thought would be perfect for one of our Halloween episodes. Our next solo episode, we're going to still talk about voice. So this is going to come out October 14th, but we're going to dive into a short story collection and pull some excerpts from there, really studying how different authors talk about the exact same thing. So you have a couple weeks before that episode launches. I highly recommend grabbing it and reading it for yourself because it's a really great spooky read as well. The book is called Vampires Never Get Old, Tales with Fresh Bite, and it is edited by Zoraida Cordova and Natalie C. Parker. There's a ton of really awesome short stories in here about vampires, so I thought it would be the perfect short story collection to dive into for the month of October. So it's on Kindle Unlimited right now. You can also go ahead and purchase it at your local indie bookstore, but go ahead and check that out if you want to get ahead. If not, we will be reading excerpts from that and studying voice again. Short story collections are a really great way. I guess short story anthologies, ones that are written by different authors, but all have the same theme or topic, is such a good way to study voice because you get to see a ton of authors' voices side by side. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Pen to Pod. If you like this episode and you want to hear more, go back and listen to our first episode where we interviewed author Kath Richards about her mafia romance, A Love Most Fatal. If you haven't yet, please go ahead and give us a follow wherever you listen to podcasts, whether that's on Spotify, Apple, or here on my YouTube channel, Mick Writes. When you give us a follow, you are signing up for those notifications so you will never miss when we go live. If you enjoyed what we talked about, go ahead and tell your writer friends, share it on social media, and just let the world know you love Pen to Pod. Thanks again for listening, and I can't wait to talk with you all soon.